My sister looked me dead in the eyes at her engagement party and said, "I just need you to understand that the wedding has a very specific aesthetic, and you don't really fit it." I smiled and nodded and told her I understood completely. What I didn't tell her was that I was the one quietly paying for that aesthetic, every single dollar of it. Let me back up, because this story doesn't start at the engagement party. It starts 3 years before that, in a hospital waiting room in Phoenix, when our mother had her second stroke and my sister sat across from me crying about how she couldn't possibly handle the stress of managing mom's bills on top of her own. My sister is 4 years older than me. She has always been the beautiful one, the social one, the one people notice when she walks into a room. I was the one who went to community college, while she went to ASU on a partial scholarship our parents scraped together. I was the one who learned QuickBooks at 19 and started doing bookkeeping for small businesses out of our parents' kitchen. By the time I was 24, I had 3 steady clients, a modest savings account, and a very clear understanding of how money works and how quickly it disappears when you're not paying attention. My sister, at 28, had a marketing degree, a boyfriend who worked in real estate, and a lifestyle that consistently outpaced what either of them actually made. When Mom had that second stroke, everything shifted. The medical bills were manageable at first. Mom had insurance, but the follow-up care, the in-home aid 3 days a week, the modifications to her house so she could move around safely, those added up fast. My sister and I sat down together and agreed we would split it. She would handle the aid costs. I would handle everything else. For about 4 months, that's exactly what happened. Then my sister called me one Sunday afternoon and explained, very gently, that her boyfriend, I'll call him her fiancé now, though he wasn't yet, had some cash flow issues with a property deal, and things were tight. Could I cover the aid for just this month? She would pay me back. I covered it. The next month, same story. Different reason, her car needed new brakes. The timing was just bad. Could I cover it again? I covered it. By month 6, she had stopped asking. The aid bills just came to me. I didn't say anything. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself she was under pressure. I told myself this is what family does. What I was actually doing, and I didn't understand this until much later, was quietly terrified that if I said no, she would pull back entirely, and I would be the only one left holding everything alone. I had convinced myself that some help from her was better than none, even when that help had entirely evaporated. I kept giving because stopping felt like abandonment. I kept giving because it was easier than having the conversation. I kept giving because somewhere underneath all of it, I still needed her to be the older sister I remembered from when we were kids, the one who used to save me the last of the good cereal and let me sleep in her bed during thunderstorms. That sister had been gone for a long time. I just hadn't fully admitted it yet. By the time my sister got engaged, she and her boyfriend had been together for 4 years. At that point, I had been covering Mom's full care costs for nearly 2 years. That was running about $2,200 a month between the aid, the prescription co-pays, the occasional physical therapy session. Mom's insurance didn't fully cover, and the small groceries and household items I picked up when I visited on weekends. On top of that, my sister had borrowed $3,000 from me for what she described as a cash flow emergency right before Christmas the year before. Something about a car repair that turned out to be a new car. A detail I discovered later when she drove up to Mom's house, in a white Hyundai, she'd apparently financed, and another $1,500 for a girls' trip to Scottsdale. She said she desperately needed for her mental health. She never paid back a dollar of any of it. When she got engaged and called me, I was genuinely happy for her. I remember exactly where I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, still in pajamas, and she called screaming, and I screamed back, and we stayed on the phone for an hour talking about the ring and the proposal, and how he'd done it on a hike at Camelback Mountain at sunset. It was a genuinely good phone call. I felt like maybe things were shifting between us, like maybe this milestone would bring us closer. About a month later, she asked if I could help with the wedding. I want to be careful here about how I tell this part, because I don't want it to sound like I was naive. I wasn't, not entirely. But I was hopeful, and hope can make you agree to things your better judgment would otherwise reject. She explained that they wanted a wedding that reflected who they were: tasteful, elegant, Not over the top, but beautiful. The venue they had fallen in love with was an outdoor ranch property about 40 minutes outside of Scottsdale. They were looking at about 120 guests. She had a rough budget in mind. She wanted to know if I could contribute toward the venue deposit to help them get it locked in, and they would pay me back as the wedding fund built up. I said yes. The deposit was $3,000. I wrote the check. Over the following 18 months, I contributed to the wedding in ways that were never quite framed as contributing to the wedding. It was always something specific, something urgent, something with a deadline. The florist required a deposit by a certain date, and they were just a little short. The catering company had a package deal that expired at the end of the month. The photographer, she wanted a woman whose work I genuinely admired when my sister showed me her Instagram was going to be booked by someone else if they didn't put down a retainer immediately. I became, without ever formally agreeing to it, the financial backstop of this wedding. I kept a spreadsheet. I'm a bookkeeper. I keep spreadsheets for everything. By the time the wedding was 14 months away, I had put in just over $19,000 between the venue, florals, photography, and various smaller items. This was on top of still covering mom's care costs every month. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. $19,000. That is not a loan. That is not a gift. That was money I had saved, slowly, carefully, by working 7 days a week for years. That was now sitting inside someone else's dream wedding. And here is where I need to tell you something important, because I have seen the comments on stories like mine, and I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, why did you keep doing it? Why didn't you say no? What is wrong with you? I've asked myself that question so many times. The honest answer is complicated. Part of it was fear, the way I described before. Part of it was that my sister was very good at making each request feel reasonable in isolation. No single ask was outrageous. 3,000 here, 1,500 there. Each one had a story, a context, a deadline, an emotion attached. When you're inside it, you don't see the full picture. You see a series of reasonable emergencies, not a pattern. But the bigger part of it, the part I'm most honest about now, is that I loved her. I loved the idea of her being happy. I loved the idea of being the person who helped make something beautiful happen for someone I cared about. I confused being useful with being loved. And people who confuse those two things will give until there's nothing left, because they're not actually giving to the other person. They're trying to buy their way into feeling like they matter. It took me a long time to understand that. About 8 months before the wedding, my sister and I had coffee together, and she started talking about the bridal party. She wanted 4 bridesmaids, 2 of her closest friends from college, her fiancé's sister, and me. I assumed I was the 4th. I had been in her life for every significant moment. I was funding a material portion of the event. I had helped her pick the venue, test the caterer, review the florist's mock-ups. I was, by any reasonable measure, deeply involved in this wedding. She reached across the table and took my hand in that way she has, the way that always meant a difficult sentence was coming. And she said, I need to talk to you about the bridal party because I want to be honest with you, and I don't want there to be any weirdness. She told me that she had decided to keep the bridal party to 3 people, her 2 college friends and her fiancé's sister. She said her fiancé's family was very traditional, and having an uneven bridal party bothered them. She said she wanted the aesthetic to be cohesive, and the dresses she had chosen were very specific, and it was honestly easier with 3. She said, and I remember this sentence exactly because I have turned it over in my head hundreds of times since. You're so important to me, but you're more of a behind-the-scenes person anyway. You'd be doing more good, making sure everything runs smoothly, than standing up front. Behind the scenes, I was the behind-the-scenes person. I sat with a smile on my face and told her I completely understood that it was her day and she should have it exactly how she envisioned it. We finished our coffee. I drove home. I sat in my car in my parking garage for about 20 minutes, staring at nothing. Then I opened my spreadsheet. I didn't say anything to her. Not that day. Not the next week. I kept doing what I had been doing, covering mom's aid costs, responding to texts about wedding logistics, answering questions about whether the cocktail hour timeline made sense. I kept being the behind-the-scenes person, but something had changed. I could feel it, the way you can feel a shift in weather before it actually arrives. I wasn't hurt in the way I might have expected. I wasn't even particularly angry. Not right away. What I felt was something quieter and more clarifying than anger. I felt like I was finally seeing the shape of something I had been standing too close to for years. My sister didn't see me as a partner. She didn't see me as an equal. She saw me as a resource reliable, undemanding, unlikely to make a scene. I was the one who made things work, not the one worth celebrating. And she had been so confident in that arrangement that she didn't even feel the need to be careful about how she said it out loud. The weeks that followed were a kind of quiet education for me. I started watching more carefully. I noticed that my sister never asked about my work, never asked about my life in any meaningful way. Our conversations were about her wedding, her plans, her feelings. When I tried to share something going on with me, a new client I was excited about, a trip I was considering, a book I was reading, she had a way of listening just long enough to redirect back to herself. It wasn't malicious. I don't think she even noticed she was doing it. That was almost the harder thing to accept. I noticed that in the wedding's public-facing details, the wedding website, the engagement photos posted on Instagram, the posts about the venue I didn't exist. The captions talked about the people who made this possible in vague and grateful terms. There was no mention of the person whose money had made the photography deposit and the florist's retainer and the venue itself possible. I noticed that when I mentioned, carefully, that I was going to be a little stretched financially that month and might be a week late on Mom's aid payment, my sister said, without missing a beat, "Oh, can you make it work? I just already moved some things around in our budget, assuming you'd have it covered." Our budget. She said our budget, meaning hers and her fiancé's. The budget I was not part of. The budget that had apparently already incorporated my money as a line item without asking me. I didn't say anything. I covered Mom's aid on time. I want to be clear about something. This story does not have a moment where I snapped. There was no single incident that pushed me over an edge. What happened was slower and more deliberate than that. I made a decision, quietly, rationally, the way I make financial decisions by looking at the full picture and deciding what made sense going forward. What didn't make sense was spending another dollar I hadn't agreed to spend on a wedding where I was the invisible infrastructure. What didn't make sense was continuing to subsidize a version of my sister's life she had decided I wasn't good enough to be visibly part of. The wedding was 6 weeks away when I made my decision. I spent 3 evenings going through my spreadsheet. I calculated everything I had contributed, the deposits, the retainers, the borrowed money she'd never repaid, the months of Mom's care costs that had been designated as her responsibility and quietly became mine. The total, not counting Mom's care over the prior 2.5 years, was just under $23,000. Adding Mom's care that had been her share, the total was closer to $41,000. I wasn't going to demand that back. I knew better. What I was going to do was stop. The venue required a final payment 6 weeks before the event, the remaining balance on the rental fee, which was substantial. My sister had called me 2 weeks earlier to confirm I was good for my part of it, a phrase I had come to understand meant the entirety of it, and I had said I would take care of it. I did not take care of it. I also reached out, quietly, to the catering company. I had been listed as the secondary contact on the account because I was the one who handled logistics. I let them know that there had been a change in the payment arrangement, and they should contact the bride directly for the upcoming balance due. I called Mom's home care agency and set up a new payment arrangement that came directly out of a small joint account. Mom and I had set up for exactly this purpose, an account my sister had never contributed to, so nothing changed for Mom. This was important to me. Whatever was happening between my sister and me, Mom's care was not going to be affected. That was a line I would not cross. I did not call my sister. I did not send a long email explaining myself. I did not draft a letter laying out all the grievances. I had watched enough situations like this, in my own life and in other people's, to know that big emotional confrontations rarely land the way you want them to. They give the other person a chance to perform, to cry, to make themselves the victim of your anger. I didn't want to give her that. I just stopped. The venue called her first. I know this because she called me approximately 40 minutes after the venue's call, and her voice had that particular quality it got when she was trying to sound calm over something that was actively distressing her. "Hey," she said. "So, I just got a weird call from the venue. They said the final payment didn't go through? I'm sure it's just some kind of processing issue." I said it wasn't a processing issue. There was a silence that lasted several seconds. "What do you mean?" I told her I had decided not to make that payment. I told her I had also let the catering company know to contact her directly for the balance on their contract. I kept my voice even. I wasn't unkind. I wasn't cold, exactly. I was simply matter of fact, the way I am when I'm explaining a budget to a client. The calm lasted about 30 seconds. Then she asked me what I was doing. Then she told me I was being insane. Then she said I was going to ruin everything, that I was doing this out of jealousy, that I had always had a problem with her happiness, that this was the most selfish thing I had ever done. I let her finish. I told her I was genuinely happy she had found someone she wanted to marry. I told her I hoped the wedding was beautiful. I told her I had loved being part of the planning process, and I meant that sincerely. I told her that I had put in just under $23,000 over the past 18 months, and that I felt I had more than honored my commitment to her happiness, and I wished her well. She hung up. She called back 4 times that evening. I let the calls go to voicemail. The first message was angry. The second was crying. The third was her fiancé, calm and controlled, suggesting we all needed to have a mature conversation about this. The fourth was my sister again, this time quiet in a way that was almost worse than the yelling, saying she couldn't believe I would do this to her, that family didn't do this to family. I did not call back that night. My phone was also, during this time, buzzing with messages from my sister's college friends, the ones who were bridesmaids, and eventually from my sister's future mother-in-law, who I had met exactly twice, but who had clearly been briefed on the situation and felt entitled to weigh in. I read all the messages. I did not respond to any of them. My aunt called the next morning. She's my mother's sister, and she is one of the few people in my life who has always been honest with me, even when I didn't want to hear it. She asked me calmly to explain what was happening. I told her everything, not just the wedding, but the years before it, the aid costs, the borrowed money, being told I was a behind-the-scenes person. I told her the numbers. There was a long silence on her end. Then she said, "Honey, I had no idea it had gotten to that point." And then she said something that I want to write down here because it mattered to me. You don't owe someone your everything just because they need it. Love isn't an obligation to be financially destroyed. I cried for the first time since all of this had started. Not from guilt, from relief. My sister reached out to my mother, which I had anticipated. Mom called me, worried and confused, and I spent an hour on the phone explaining things to her as gently as I could. I didn't need her to take sides. I just needed her to understand that I was not going to be participating in the wedding, in the financial capacity I had been, and that nothing about her own care was changing. Mom was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "I didn't know your sister wasn't paying her part. I thought you were splitting everything." Her voice was tired in a way that broke my heart. I told her it was okay, that I had handled it, that I would always handle it. That conversation with my mother made something crystallize for me. My sister had let me carry everything, while allowing our mother to believe it was a joint effort. She had taken credit, or at least accepted the false impression, without correcting it. That was a choice. That was not an oversight. The next 3 weeks were difficult. My sister made one more attempt to negotiate a long, carefully worded text message, sent late on a Tuesday night, that outlined all the ways she felt I had let her down, all the sacrifices she had made for our family over the years, all the times she had been there for me. I read it twice. Several of the examples she cited were things that had not happened the way she remembered them, and one was something that had not happened at all. I did not respond. The wedding happened on a Saturday in October. I know this because my aunt sent me a brief text that morning that just said, "Thinking of you today." I was at my kitchen table going over quarterly numbers for one of my clients. I had a good cup of coffee, and the window was open, and it was one of those October mornings in Phoenix that actually feels like fall. I was okay. Not okay in the way you perform being okay when you're actually devastated. Genuinely okay, in the quiet, specific way you feel when you've made a hard decision and lived through the consequences and discovered that you are still standing. The wedding did happen, I should note. My sister and her fiancé scrambled in those final weeks. They borrowed money from his parents. They renegotiated the catering package the venue held for them. It was smaller and less elaborate than she had planned, from what my aunt described. But it happened, and they were married. And the photos I eventually saw on social media looked like a nice day. I felt nothing complicated about any of that. I genuinely wished them well. What I felt something complicated about was the months that followed, when my sister and I existed in a state of careful distance. She did not reach out to me. I did not reach out to her. The silence between us was significant but not, I found, unbearable. It was honest in a way our relationship had not been for a long time. Mom knew something had broken between us. She didn't push. She was navigating her own feelings about what she had learned, and I gave her space for that. My aunt stayed in gentle contact with both of us, not taking sides, just keeping the thread open. About 4 months after the wedding, my sister sent me an email. Not a text, an email, which told me she had written it carefully and probably revised it several times. It was 3 paragraphs long. The first paragraph acknowledged that she had relied on me financially in ways that were not fair, and that she was sorry for that. The second paragraph said she had been in therapy and was trying to understand her own patterns. The third paragraph said she missed me and asked if we could talk. I read it several times. I want to be honest here about what I felt, because I think this is the part of the story that people sometimes want to skip past. I felt relieved. I felt sad. I felt that particular grief that comes not from losing something, but from finally admitting you lost it a long time ago and just didn't stop to look. I had grieved the sister, I thought. I had the one who saved me the good cereal, the one who called me at midnight when she got into college, and that grief had been accumulating quietly for years. I wrote back. I told her I appreciated her email. I told her I wasn't ready to talk on the phone yet, but that I would like to get coffee when I was. We got coffee 6 weeks later. It was not a clean reunion. It was halting and careful and a little painful, and neither of us cried, which felt right. She did not ask me to cover anything. She did not mention money at all. We talked about Mom, and about her life now, and about small things. It was the first conversation we'd had in years that wasn't transactional in some way. I don't know what we are to each other now. We are not as close as I once wanted us to be. We are not estranged. We are 2 people who share a history and are trying, carefully, to figure out what shape the future might take. What I know clearly is this. I am not the same person who sat in that hospital waiting room and quietly took on everything because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. I am not the person who let herself be told she was a behind-the-scenes person and nodded along and went home and felt it settle into her like a stone. I am the person who looked at a spreadsheet, understood the full picture, and made a decision. I did not ruin my sister's wedding. She had a wedding. She is married. The things that were disrupted were plans that had been built on my money without my full agreement, and when that foundation shifted, some things had to be rebuilt at a smaller scale. That is not destruction. That is accountability. I still cover Mom's care. I always will. That is a commitment I made to myself, not a favor I'm doing for anyone else. The other day, I was going through some old photos on my phone, the kind of aimless scrolling you do when you're tired, and I found a picture I'd taken at the florist consultation, about a year before the wedding. In the photo, my sister is holding up 2 different flower arrangements, laughing, trying to decide between them. I'm standing just off to the side, not looking at the camera, pointing at the one on the left. You can see from my expression that I've just said something that made her laugh. I looked at that photo for a long time, not with regret, not with anger, with something more like clarity. I was the person who made things beautiful for other people because I hadn't yet learned how to make things beautiful for myself. I thought generosity was the same as love. I thought being needed was the same as mattering. I thought if I gave enough, I would eventually earn my place at the table instead of the back of the room. I don't think that anymore. Being the behind-the-scenes person used to feel like a description of my value. Now it just sounds like what it always was, someone confusing your usefulness for your worth. I'll call myself by my worth from now on.